This morning we published a report titled More Than a Human Can Bear, dealing with Israel's systematic use of sexual, reproductive and other forms of gender-based violence since 7 October 2023. Our report finds that Israel has increasingly employed sexual, reproductive and other forms of gender-based violence against Palestinians as part of a broader effort to undermine their right to self-determination. It also concludes that Israel has carried out genocidal acts through the systematic destruction of sexual and reproductive healthcare facilities. The report documents a broad range of violations perpetrated against Palestinian women, men, girls and boys across the occupied Palestinian Territory since 7 October 2023 that constitutes a major element in the ill treatment of Palestinians and are part of the unlawful occupation and persecution of Palestinians as a group. The report released today summarises the findings of our investigations since October 2023 into these issues. It is the first in-depth UN investigation into sexual, reproductive and other forms of gender-based violence by the Israeli security forces and Israeli settlers since October 2023. The methodology used in preparation of the report is set out in paragraph 6 of the document released today. It's the standard methodology for UN investigations of this kind. Our report is based on interviews with victims and witnesses, including expert medical witnesses, some of whom appeared during the public hearings which we have conducted over the last 2 days. The report lists a number of conclusions. I draw your attention to one that perhaps best summarises the bottom line at the end of our investigations. That's contained in paragraph 223. The frequency, prevalence and severity of sexual and gender-based crimes perpetrated across the occupied Palestinian Territory leads the Commission to conclude that sexual and gender-based violence is increasingly used as a method of war by Israel to destabilise, dominate, oppress and destroy the Palestinian people. The Commission documented a pattern of sexual violence, including cases of rape and other forms of sexual violence, torture and other inhumane acts that amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Israel continues to obstruct the Commission... Israel continues to obstruct the Commission's investigations and prevent its access not only to Israel itself, but also to the occupied Palestinian Territory. As mentioned in the report, several requests for information and access were sent to the Government of Israel, including requests for information on specific cases of sexual and gender-based violence carried out by members of the Israeli security forces. The Commission has not received any information about prosecutions of members of the Israeli security forces or Israeli settlers for sexual and violence committed since October 2023. The report is published on our website today. It is being translated into Arabic and Hebrew, and those translations will be published on the website as soon as they are available. We are also having some infographics prepared that try to present in visual form much of the data, particularly the statistics in the report itself. We hope that they will be on our website by the end of the week. I welcome any questions about our report and look forward very much to responding to some issues that you may wish to raise during the course of our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now we'll open the floor to questions. We'll take one first in the front row on the right. If you could please just identify yourself and the media outlet that you work for.
Yeah, Laurent Sierot, Swiss News Agency. Thanks for the press conference. I'd like a clarification on you mentioned 2 categories of genocidal acts that have been met. When the Special Rapporteur Albanese talks about that, she clearly talks about genocide. So I'd like you to drive us through that characterization that you made, the categories of genocidal acts. So what does that mean? Does that mean that you consider that these acts amounts to genocide or partly to genocide, or how to explain that characterization. And then the Israeli mission here in Geneva rejected the report and said that there is a double standard in the methodology, because this report is not leaning on corroborated facts, in the contrary with the reports that are dealing with the violences against the other side. So, yeah, your reaction on that. Thank you.
It had gone off. I'm afraid I have to talk like a lawyer when I answer a legal question about the law of genocide. But your question is a legal question, and therefore it requires a legal response. The definition of genocide is the same in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and in the much older Genocide Convention. And it's a complex definition. Like all crimes, it has two elements, action and intention. We, at this stage, are only looking at action, and therefore our report deals with two categories of genocidal act. The definition contains, in fact, 5 categories of genocidal act. And when we gather evidence and prepare our reports, we look to the various categories of crime under international law to see whether the acts that we have investigated meet the standards, meet the definitions contained in the law. The second side of genocide is intention. And the genocide definition is especially complex because it has 2 different elements of intention. One is a general intent, the intent to do the acts. But the second is a special intent, the intent to do the acts for the purpose of destroying a protected group in whole or in part. So when we refer to 2 categories of genocidal act, we are referring only to one part of the legal definition. We have not yet looked comprehensively at the definition as a whole, and specifically, we have not yet looked at the question of genocidal intent. At some stage, we'll do that. We're collecting evidence, we are producing our reports. You will have seen them going back now from our establishment. Our first reports were in 2022, but in particular, our reports in 2024 and now 2025 are looking at the events since October 7, 2023. And we will have to look at the question of genocidal intent, but we have not yet done so. So that's the legal explanation of where we have reached, but also where we are going. Your second question dealt with the response from the Israeli mission here in Geneva. I was quite surprised to see that response. Netanyahu has said that Israel will not participate in the council or any of its processes. So I'm worried that the Israeli mission here may be disciplined for breaching that order of the Prime Minister of Israel. So, yeah, a bit surprised. Look, the bottom line is, as usual, it's all lies. They clearly do not read our documents. They clearly have an agenda that they pursue, totally devoid from any relationship to fact. It's just chronic lying. I note a very rapid turnover of the staff dealing with media at the Israeli mission here. I assume that's because they are people with journalistic backgrounds who get fed up with having to lie all the time. I note that even Hagari now has finally given up. So I don't take it very seriously.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a question in the second row from New York Times.
Yeah, good morning, thank you. Your findings in relation to destruction of reproductive health care and preventing birth focuses very particularly on the Basma IVF clinic. I just wondered if you could elaborate on why you conclude that this was deliberately targeted. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not noticing that it keeps turning off. I'm just assuming that it's on all the time. The Basma IVF clinic was the largest fertility clinic or program in Gaza, the largest by far. There are smaller fertility services provided in some of the hospitals, but Basma was the best known and the largest by far. Its location was extremely well known, and it's posted on its building itself as a medical clinic, and the logo indicates women and children. So the first part of intention, I think, is very clear. It was known to anybody who was standing outside that building that it was a medical facility. The Israeli authorities have geolocations for all healthcare and other protected facilities in Gaza. By protected, I include schools, shelters, locations of internally displaced persons and so forth. So certainly the Israeli authorities would know what the purpose of that clinic was. There is a question about whether those who were firing the tank shell, because our conclusion is that it was destroyed by a tank shell, knew at that time that it was a fertility clinic, but certainly their commanders knew, and the commanders would have known that there were tanks operating within that vicinity and firing on buildings and fired on a healthcare facility that was clearly marked. So it's not possible to say that the destruction of the building was unintentional or accidental. There is an issue about whether it was specifically aimed at the fact that it was a fertility clinic, but given what we know about the circumstances of the attack and the data that is available to the Israeli military authorities and the way in which the war has been conducted, we were able to conclude on reasonable grounds that it was an intentional attack on a healthcare facility that was providing reproductive services.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to the second row on the left.
Thank you. Dina Bisab. I represent several Arabic media. My question is about the images that we are seeing almost daily since the beginning of the war in Gaza. In the past, the leak of very few images from Abu Ghraib, for example, in Iraq, was enough to make a scandal. Today, we have seen hundreds, maybe thousands of images and videos from the prisons, and prisoners very badly treated, as you explained in your report, but no changes, and we feel that as if the world is not treating this as a scandal anymore. As a lawyer, you said that you are a lawyer. How do you describe this? Thank you.
I describe it, Nina, as willful ignorance, even willful denial on the part of the international system. I accept that there is a intense competition for news coverage these days. It's very difficult to get tragic situations, the coverage that they require in the international media. You must, all of you, know that yourself, how hard it is to get coverage for these things when there is so much else going on. And that's part of the story, but it's known. We deal at some length in the report at the stripping and the physical and psychological abuse of men and boys. The report deals very much with sexual violence against women, but in this situation, it's also sexual violence against men and boys. And we heard evidence, you would have heard it if you were looking at our hearings during the last 2 days, where men and boys were forced to strip wholly or almost wholly, that is down to underpants, and then were kept in that condition, often having to sit on stones on the ground in the cold in winter for up to 3 days. Now, this is physical abuse, but it's also psychological abuse. It's designed to humiliate. So we have no doubt at all, on the basis of the evidence that we received, what is going on. But to get these events the international attention and international action that they deserve has proved a task that we find frustrating, but that the Palestinian victims must find increasing their humiliation, increasing the demeaning conduct that they are being exposed to. there is an urgent need for accountability. Not just accountability because perpetrators of past crimes should be punished, that's called justice, but also accountability as a means of prevention. These things continue to occur because no one is ever held accountable. They're not held accountable in Israeli military courts, they are not held accountable in Israeli civil courts, and when we see the first tentative efforts at international accountability, we see the kind of hysterical, illegal reactions from some parts of the international system. So this will continue unless and until there is accountability. And the victims can only feel frustrated at our failure. It is our failure as an international system